The tab popped on the seltzer can. Lumi didn't flinch. She'd known someone was watching since she'd stepped out of the town car, the way the doorman had said ma'am like it was a test she was already failing. She lifted the can, let the bubbles settle on her tongue, and waited. Julian worries you might go off script. She turned. Dark suit. Perfect knot. Eyes that had seen too many nights like this to pretend they were still curious about anything. Julian worries about the wrong things, she said. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that probably looked friendly in softer light, but here, under the cold crystal of the backstage corridor, Rita's watchful. Professional. The kind of man who'd been paid to notice everything and react to nothing. Evan Mercer, he said, by way of introduction. Crisis consultant. I know who you are. She took another sip, let the silence stretch. You've been following me since the coat check. He didn't deny it. You're the only person here who paid for her own drink. She glanced at the vending machine, the dull fluorescent glow, the rows of overpriced water and undersatisfying snacks. The champagne's too sweet. I wasn't talking about the champagne. Lumi smiled, just slightly. Is that your professional way of asking if I'm dangerous? Something flickered in his eyes. Interest, maybe. Or wariness. It was hard to tell with men like him, men who'd learned to keep their tells buried so deep even they'd forgotten where they'd hidden them. Are you? He asked. She stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint shadow of stubble along his jaw, the way his tie was knotted so precisely it looked like it was choking him. Only to men who confuse quiet with permission. His hand came up to adjust his collar. A nervous habit he thought he'd killed, she guessed. He caught himself halfway through and dropped it to his side. You're supposed to be in the green room, he said. Julian's assistant wants to run through the remarks. Remarks. She tasted the word. A diplomatic way of saying lines. Script. Things someone else decided you should say. I remember my lines, she said. Thank you, Mr. Voss. So grateful for the opportunity. Looking forward to the future. She paused. Which part of that do I need to rehearse? Evan Mercer's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. The part where you don't improvise. I don't improvise. She finished the seltzer, crushed the can one-handed, and looked around for a recycling bin. There wasn't one. Of course there wasn't. She tucked the can into her clutch instead. I just say what's true. That's not the same thing. She left him standing in the corridor, the crushed can a small weight in her bag, and walked toward the green room. The heels Julian's stylist had picked out were too high and slightly too tight, but she'd learned years ago how to walk in shoes that didn't fit. Arch the foot. Shift the weight. Make it look effortless. The green room was a study in controlled luxury. Velvet armchairs. A mirror ringed with bulbs. A tray of champagne flutes that no one was drinking from because everyone was too busy pretending they didn't need the alcohol. A young woman in a headset rushed over. Lumi? Thank God. Mr. Voss wants to see you before you go on. Just a quick word. Lumi followed her through a maze of corridors, past caterers carrying towers of canapes and security guards with earpieces and the low hum of a jazz band warming up in the ballroom beyond. The hotel was old money disguised as new, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, the kind of opulence that was designed to make you feel like you belonged, then quietly remind you that you didn't. Julian Voss was waiting in a small private lounge, a cigar smoldering in his hand. He was handsome in the way of men who'd never been told no, silver hair, tailored suit, the relaxed confidence of someone who'd always known exactly where the exits were. Lumi. He stood, offered his hand. She took it. His grip was firm and cold. You look stunning. That dress was made for you. She looked down at the deep blue silk, the way it caught the light like water at midnight. It cost more than her rent for a year. Julian had had it delivered to her apartment that morning, along with a note that said, "Wear this. They'll listen." She hadn't asked where he'd gotten her address. "Thank you," she said. "It's beautiful. I wanted you to feel like you belonged tonight." He gestured to the chair across from him, and she sat. He didn't. This is a big moment for the theater. For the community. For all of us. She nodded, keeping her face neutral. She'd been told, in the briefings and emails and the phone calls that had preceded this evening, that Julian Voss was a visionary. A philanthropist. A man who understood that the old theater needed new life. She'd also been told, by the volunteers and the staff and the old man who still came every Tuesday to teach Shakespeare, that the theater's roof was leaking and its boiler was dying, and no one from Julian's organization had actually come to look at either. "I know you've been nervous about the speech," Julian continued, settling into the chair across from her. "And I want you to know, you can trust me. Whatever happens tonight, I'm on your side. Whatever happens." The phrase landed strangely, like a dish that looked right but tasted wrong. "What do you think might happen?" she asked. Julian's smile held. "Nothing. Nothing at all. I just want you to feel supported. You're the voice of the community tonight. That's important." She held his gaze for a beat longer than comfortable, then nodded. "I understand." "Good." He stood, clapped her shoulder. 3 minutes. Warm, heartfelt, grateful. "You know the words." She did. She'd been practicing them for weeks. "Thank you, Mr. Voss. So grateful for the opportunity. Looking forward to the future." What she hadn't practiced was how to say them and mean them. The ballroom glittered like a jewelry box, crystal, silk, flowers flown in from 3 different countries, the whole thing humming with the particular energy of people who'd paid a lot of money to be seen paying a lot of money. Lumi found her assigned seat at Julian's right hand and sat, letting the champagne glass in front of her remain untouched. The speeches began. The usual parade. Donors, board members, local politicians, each one rising to praise Julian's vision, his commitment, his unwavering dedication to enriching the cultural landscape. The words were hollow. She knew because she'd read most of them in the press packet Evan Mercer had handed her 3 hours ago. She scanned the room for him. Found him standing near the stage-left curtains, a shadow in a perfect suit, watching everything with those dark, unreadable eyes. He'd be watching her tonight, she knew. That was his job. Make sure the asset performed. Make sure nothing went wrong. She touched the stem of her wine glass. Just a finger, light against the crystal. He didn't look away. Good. She hadn't expected him to. The dinner service progressed. Salad, then fish, then something that might have been beef but tasted like nothing she'd ever encountered outside a hotel kitchen. She ate mechanically, nodding in the right places, smiling when she was supposed to smile. A journalist at the press table, young woman, sharp glasses, the kind of look that said "I'm not here to make friends," stood and aimed her recorder at Julian. "Mr. Voss, can you speak to the specific timeline for the theater's renovation? There've been rumors about a change in scope." Julian's smile didn't waver. "We're taking a phased approach," he said smoothly. "First the structural issues, the roof, the foundation. Then the modernization. We want to preserve the theater's historical character while updating it for a new generation." Lumi's finger found the wine glass again. Tapped once. A tiny, crystalline ping that no one heard but Evan Mercer. She saw him shift, a fractional movement, as if the sound had landed somewhere in his chest. A few minutes later, Evan was at the journalist's table, murmuring something, and the woman was nodding and sitting back down. Crisis averted. The narrative intact. Lumi watched him retreat to the shadows and felt a small, quiet satisfaction. He was good at his job, she'd give him that. The professional touch. The calm voice. The way he made problems disappear without anyone noticing. But she'd noticed. And she'd noticed that he'd looked at her, just for a moment, as he'd walked away. The auction segment began. Paddles went up for vacation homes and sports cars and a private dinner with some celebrity whose name Lumi recognized but couldn't attach to anything real. She watched the numbers climb, the bids coming faster and faster, each one a small declaration of wealth so casual it made her chest ache. She slipped out of the ballroom during a particularly aggressive bidding war, her heels silent on the plush carpet of the corridor. She found a small anteroom near the service entrance and pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls from the theater's volunteer coordinator. She dialed back. Lumi, thank God. The rain, it's worse than we thought. The east wing roof is completely compromised. We've got water coming in through the children's rehearsal space. She closed her eyes. Pictured the room. The old piano in the corner, the mismatched chairs, the poster on the wall that said act as if. Is anyone in the building? Just the maintenance crew. They're trying to tarp it, but the wind, tell them to get out. Water damage we can fix. Injuries we can't. She opened her eyes, her voice steadying. I'll be there first thing tomorrow. Just make sure everyone stays safe. She ended the call and stood there, the phone heavy in her hand. The rehearsal space. The one the kids had painted themselves, turquoise and gold, the color of the sky just before dawn. The one where the single mother had found free art lessons for her daughter. The one where Lumi had walked in on the worst night of her life and heard laughter and realized she could keep going. The door opened behind her. She turned, already composing her face into something neutral. Evan Mercer stood in the doorway, his silhouette lit by the corridor's cold light. Problem? He asked. Roof, she said, pocketing the phone. The rain's worse than predicted. It's leaking into the east wing. You should have told Julian's team. They have resources, Julian's team doesn't care about the roof. She heard the edge in her voice and didn't try to soften it. Julian's team cares about the press release he's about to give. The cameras. The donations. The narrative. Evan stepped into the room, letting the door close behind him. The space was small, a maid station, maybe, or a storage closet converted into a sitting area. The only light came from a single lamp on a side table, casting long shadows across the walls. You're angry, he observed. I'm tired. She shook her head, pressing the heel of her hand against her forehead. I'm tired of being used. Tired of pretending this gala is about anything but ego. Tired of, she stopped, aware that she was showing too much. She'd learned years ago that showing too much was a weakness, that the powerful could smell vulnerability like blood in the water. But Evan wasn't moving. Wasn't retreating. He stood there, watching her, his face unreadable. Don't, she said, holding up a hand. Don't do the sympathetic thing. I've seen how you work. The warm voice, the understanding eyes. You make people feel heard so you can collect information to use against them later. His expression flickered, surprise, maybe, or recognition. That's a hell of an accusation. It's an observation. Different thing. You said that before. He took a step closer. About improvisation. I remember what I said. She didn't step back. I'm not the one who forgot. They stood there, 3 feet of air between them, and something in that small space shifted. Not hostility, that had been there from the beginning. Something else. Something that felt like the moment before a storm breaks, when the air goes still and the sky turns green. You used to be a journalist, she said. It wasn't a question. She saw the confirmation in the way his shoulders tightened, the way his hand went to his tie again. How do you know that? You listen like someone who misses asking better questions. The silence that followed was thick enough to hold. Evan felt it settle around him, heavy and warm, the way a blanket settles over someone who's been cold too long. No one had said that to him in years. No one had even come close. People saw the suit and the watch and the polished surface of his professional demeanor, and they assumed that was all there was. But Lumi had looked at him and seen something else. Something he'd thought he'd buried so deep even he'd forgotten where to find it. He opened his mouth to deflect, to make a joke, to do what he'd always done when someone got too close. I used to write, he said instead. A long time ago. Pieces about the neighborhoods no one wanted to talk about. The families being pushed out by developers. The small beauties of a world that was being erased. That's a hard thing to stop doing. He laughed, a short, bitter sound. It's easy when you realize no one's reading. When you realize the stories don't change anything. When you realize the powerful always win, and the best you can do is find a comfortable position on the winning side. Is that what you think you've done? She asked it gently, without judgment, and somehow that made it worse. If she'd been angry, he could have fought. If she'd been disappointed, he could have defended himself. But she was just looking at him with those quiet, knowing eyes, and he felt like she could see straight through the 10 years of careful compromise to the 25-year-old kid who believed he could change the world with a pen. I don't know what I believe anymore, he admitted. She nodded slowly, her expression softening. That's a beginning. The lamp flickered, casting their shadows across the wall, and for a moment they were just two people in a small room, the weight of the gala and the speeches and the leaking roof pressing in from outside. I should go back, she said. Julian's about to introduce me. Lumi. She paused at the door, her hand on the handle. Looked back at him. Don't say anything you can't take back, he said. This is your night. Whatever happens, make sure it's yours. She stared at him for a long moment, then smiled, a real smile, the first one he'd seen from her all night. I always do. She walked to the stage like she'd been born to it. The spotlight caught her as she passed through the curtains, turning the deep blue of her dress into something liquid, something alive. She reached the microphone and stood there, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the room to realize it had been waiting for her. I've never owned a dress this expensive, she said. Her voice carried to the back of the ballroom, clear and steady. And I'm pretty sure the people at the old theater would rather I use this money to fix the heater. A ripple of nervous laughter. Julian's smile held, but she saw the flicker in his eyes, the sudden calculation. She kept going. The children who couldn't afford lessons anywhere else. The single mother who'd found community in a rehearsal room with a leaking roof. The old man who still came every week, who taught her that Shakespeare wasn't about the words, it was about the feeling behind them. We don't need a new building, she said. We need a roof that doesn't leak. We need a boiler that works. We need someone to look at us and see not a project, not a photo op, but people. Real people who laugh and cry and keep showing up even when the odds are against us. She paused, letting the room feel the weight of her words. Mr. Voss's plan will tear that building down. He calls it redevelopment. I call it erasing a place where people who feel invisible are reminded they exist. The silence that followed was absolute. She'd seen it before, the moment when the truth lands like a stone in still water, the ripples spreading outward, changing everything. And then she found him. Evan, in the wings, his hand on the control board. The assistant beside him was reaching for the mute button. She could see the urgency in the man's face, the way his fingers were already extended, already reaching. Evan's hand moved faster. Not toward the button. Past it. He grabbed the mute control cable and pulled it free. There was a soft pop, the sound of a connection breaking, and then she was alone, unfiltered, her voice the only thing in the room. "Simple can still be memorable," she said, softer now. "I hope you'll remember this night for what it really was." The applause started small. One pair of hands, near the back. An old man in a worn jacket, one of the theater's volunteers, the one who'd taught her to love Shakespeare. Then another pair. And another. And then the whole room was rising, the sound swelling like a tide, and Lumi stood at the microphone with the light in her eyes and the truth on her lips and the feeling that something had just cracked open, something that couldn't be put back together. She stepped down from the stage, and the chaos began. Julian's people swarmed around him, damage control in motion. The journalists were surging forward, recorders raised. The volunteers from the theater had formed a protective circle, not aggressive, just present. And Evan was there, in the shadows, reaching for her hand. "Come on," he said, and his voice was rough, urgent. "This way." She took his hand, and they moved together through the backstage corridors, past the velvet curtains and the sound equipment and the people who were too busy with the drama in the ballroom to notice the two of them slipping away. They burst through a service exit into an alley behind the hotel. The air was cold and clean, the rain finally stopped, the streetlights painting silver shadows on the wet pavement. They stood there, breathing hard, still holding hands. "You pulled the cable," she said. "I pulled it." He was grinning, a real grin, the kind she hadn't seen on his face all night. "I broke the mute button. Completely. Unrecoverable. That was stupid. That was necessary." She laughed, a sound that surprised her. "You just burned your entire career." "Probably." He shrugged, still grinning. "Worth it." She looked at him, really looked. The suit was rumpled now. The perfect tie was loosened. The mask he'd worn all night was gone, and underneath it was someone she hadn't expected, someone younger, maybe, someone who'd been waiting a long time to stop pretending. "You looked like you were waiting for permission," she said softly. His grin faded. "I didn't know I needed it until you gave it." She stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the fine lines around his mouth, the way his breath had gone shallow. "I didn't give you anything," she said. "You gave yourself permission. I just watched." He reached up, his hand brushing a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered on her cheek, warm and calloused. "Lumi," he said, and her name sounded different in his voice, like a question and an answer at the same time. "Evan." She didn't wait. She kissed him, soft and slow, right there in the alley with the streetlights buzzing overhead and the distant sound of sirens somewhere in the city. It wasn't a fairy tale kiss. It was too real for that, the cold air on their faces, the faint smell of rain and car exhaust, the knowledge that the chaos they'd just created was still happening, still unfurling, still changing everything. But when she pulled back, his hand was still on her cheek, and his eyes were still on hers, and she knew she wasn't alone anymore. They walked through the quiet streets, past the closed shops and the taxi cabs and the neon signs that flickered in the wet windows. The city was settling into the hour before dawn, the kind of hour when anything felt possible. "The theater," she said. I have to go first thing tomorrow. I need to see the damage, talk to the volunteers, figure out what we can salvage. I'll help. He said it without hesitation. I've got contacts at the preservation office. I can make calls, pull strings. Whatever you need. She looked at him sideways. You don't have to do that. I know. He met her eyes. I want to. They walked in silence for a while, their hands clasped, their footsteps falling into rhythm. What happens now? She asked. He thought about it. I don't know. I've got no job, no references, and a very angry billionaire who's probably already got lawyers writing things about me. That's a problem. Maybe. He squeezed her hand. But for the first time in a long time, it feels like my problem. Not someone else's. Mine. She stopped walking, pulling him to a halt under a street lamp. The light cast gold shadows on his face, softening the sharp edges. Thank you, she said. For making sure everyone could hear me. He smiled, a slow, real smile. I just made sure the button didn't work. You did the rest. Still. She reached up, touched his cheek. You could have let them shut me up. You didn't. I couldn't, he said. Not after everything you said. Not after, he stopped, searching for the words. Not after I realized I'd rather be on the side of the truth than on the side of the person paying me. She leaned in, kissed his cheek, a soft promise. Walk with me, she said. Just a little further. He nodded, and they walked. The sky was starting to lighten, the first gray fingers of dawn reaching across the buildings. Somewhere in the distance, a bird sang, small and hopeful, like it believed the morning would be better than the night. They walked through the city together, their shadows stretching long and dark in the streetlight, two people who'd found something unexpected in the chaos of a ruined gala. They walked, and they didn't let go.
Subscribe to me for more content.